Hey everybody, Joe Moriarty, Raven 360. Just recorded an awesome conversation with Dirk Braune from BMC Software. Dirk's a repeat guest, but we really got into some great detail today and some conversation about how they think about their subscription learning, how they think about pricing that, content creation, how do they create content, what content has worked, what hasn't worked. So all questions that I've been asked by you all and certainly in a lot of my customer conversations that I have. So we tried to get some of those answered with a kind of a true expert in Dirk. Okay, welcome back to another training-led growth podcast. Back by popular demand. I have a special guest, or our first, I think, return guest. But again, by popular demand, we have Dirk Braune from BMC Software. Thank you, Dirk, so much for joining again.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. It was great to have the first conversation about education and a lot of topics about how's the future in education. And I'm looking forward to the next kind of session talking what's changing, what's particularly about the COVID situation we are facing. Yep, there's quite a lot probably to talk about.
And here we are, both in our home offices. And now your home office looks a lot more exciting than my home office does back there.
Yeah, I would love to stay there for a longer time, but unfortunately it's only a picture and it's very, very far from my real home. I'm based out of Munich in Germany, but this picture is from Exmouth in the northwestern part of Australia. And I had the opportunity of a 2-hour flight as a passenger. I wasn't flying myself. And we flew, for example, very close to whales, different types of whales, and it was beautiful and amazing.
It does.
It's scary, of course, because there's not much around you, as you can see in that picture. If I go a bit to the side, at the same time, unbelievable. And as I do also scuba diving, it's kind of a great experience to see it from the top and then from the bottom, because a few days before I was diving and saw a couple of sharks and other animals and fishes. Yeah.
I mean, this sounds like a trip where you're trying to overcome fear and anxiety.
No, not necessary. I don't have it anyway. I'm scuba diving for many years, so you get used to it over time.
That's good. I know it's funny though, because I just listened to another podcast where the whole topic was overcoming fear and anxiety. And it's like, I don't think you ever overcome it, but you just become more comfortable with some.
Yeah. You can control it and manage it, and as long as it's okay. You shouldn't have been 90 feet down under the water, a lot of fear. It's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying to me, being that far. I've done some like snorkeling, but I'll tell you what, going that far down makes me a little anxious just thinking about it. Well, listen, thank you again. Our last podcast had a tremendous amount of interest. We talked about your history in BMC and the leadership that you have with overall learning in general. So I wanted to kick off a little bit here. Let's start with the recent history. Again, you're in Munich with everybody working from home, with everything happening that we're talking about with COVID-19. What has shifted for you guys? Just obviously all virtual, but talk me through it. What have you seen just with your business and learning specifically?
Yeah, it's really interesting, surprising sometimes, scary. It's a combination of everything. What you can see is on one side, initially we saw a lot of people taking more training because there was a little bit more time available. That's one part. Obviously, anything which was face-to-face moved completely over to a virtual environment. Fortunately enough, already 3 years ago, we started an initiative to move all our education to self-paced, virtual. For example, our certification program, initially an hands-on practice certification program, became an online proctored exam. All of that, of course, helped. What is amazing
Can I ask a question there, Dirk?
Yep.
Online proctored, how do you guys do that? How do you do the virtual and online proctored?
Yeah. So one of the typical challenges every one of our customers, our channel partners has, even if you have to go to a test center, which is the traditional model, you go to a Prometric Pearson test center, means you have to make an appointment, you have to travel there. all of that is cumbersome and time consuming. So we looked at a model where on one side you can take the exam online, so very flexible, 24/7, whenever you have time. Our exams are typically about 2 hours. And at the same time, the same security and the same proctoring you normally have in a physical environment like in a testing center. So the online proctoring works. The student is connecting to our learning management system. They get the access to the exam, but during the whole time of the access, you have somebody, and it's a third party supporting us, providing the proctoring, monitoring everything, which includes webcam monitoring the person. You have the keystrokes. The environment is locked down, so you have only access to applications we approve, like, for example, our technical documentation. And the student more or less confirms their identity in the beginning, making sure that really the person taking the exam is also the person.
Like you literally show like an ID.
Yeah. Yeah. You might have seen it with banks and insurances also. There's an online ID verification, and the same system is used. You go around with webcam to check the environment. If you don't have 10, 15 people in the back helping you to pass the exam. So it's a pretty secure environment. You can run the certification, and then the exam can be done completely online, completed, test results available immediately after you take the exam.
That's great. And you guys charge for that certification test, correct?
Yeah, in our case, the certifications are either included in our different packages. So, for example, if when somebody has registered for a subscription, the certification is part of the subscription. If someone has a learning pass with several training classes, then typically also the certification is part of the learning pass. However, you can take the certification completely separate from the training in case you have all that skills and knowledge already. And then we charge for the certification only.
So the subscription is it an annual subscription that a customer or partner can sign up for?
Yeah, we have 3 levels of subscriptions. The first one, what we call an Explore, is a free subscription just to get a feeling about the product, product features, overview, the skills assessment to understand where you are currently from a skill set. Then there's a second level of subscription, what we call Essentials. Essentials, also the third level, is an annual subscription. The Essentials brings you to the first level, what we call Fundamentals, with the associate exam at the end. And the third level is the Ultimate subscription, which is kind of an all-inclusive. You have a year full access to every content we have. The most important on Ultimate is also it includes every update we are releasing. So anytime a new product version is coming out, we're also releasing new training. If the new training becomes part of the Ultimate subscription.
And how did you guys determine your pricing? I get asked that a lot. Like, how do you figure out what the right subscription level is and pricing? Is it market-based, or how did you do it?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because obviously if you just would take the content and then price it based on the content, you would come out with a very high price. And anyway, there's 3 pricing models in the industry. You have a cost plus model, you have a market-based, and you have a value-based. We prefer to use a combination of market and value really to understand what's the value to the customer and what is a reasonable pricing in comparison to similar companies, to competitors. And for subscription in particular, it's important what's a realistic number of contents or days of content someone can take. So even if you have a subscription with, let's say, 50 days of content, in our work life, try to imagine you would have to take within a year 50 days of training, you won't have the bandwidth. Realistically, it's more in a ballpark of 10, perhaps 12 days of content every customer takes, and then you have outliers in both directions. It's like in the gym subscription. You have people who are every day in the gym, and the gym probably makes a loss on them, and then you have other people never showing up, and then you're on a plus, and whatever is the average, that's what is your base calculation. So we're using kind of an average usage of our subscription to come up with a pricing which is fair to customers in terms of what they realistically can take in terms of our offering.
So how much educating or how much marketing do you feel like you have to create around subscriptions so people understand what they're getting, understand the value of it? Have you had to do a lot of that?
Yeah, of course, for any new offer, you have to have a very strong internal and external communication. Internally, it's as important because obviously you need all your channels. If it's our product sales account management team, our services account team, the support organization, everyone can more or less communicate the value of the subscription. So the first level is really making sure everyone understands what's included, what makes a difference for the customer. And then you look from an outside perspective. Do you have blogs, communities, social posting on LinkedIn, all different media types? We have a quarterly newsletter for our customers to highlight really what's the specific advantage. And that's really sometimes depending on the customer situation. Interesting enough, with the COVID situation, even in very traditional countries, let's take the example of Italy or Spain, it was extremely hard to sell a virtual training. Everyone was very keen. So as an example, I think it was probably mid-March. So really at the start of the crisis, we still had some of the Italian account managers asking us why we're moving it to a virtual class, even that the government already were in the process of shutting down everything and businesses. So it took them some time to realize that everything has changed. In the meantime, we see the same kind of uptake of virtual classes if it's in the more traditional areas, Southern Europe, Latin America as an example. So that's definitely changing. And I think the next generation is also changing. If you look at our kids, they're used to go to a school, they're face-to-face teacher. Suddenly they're all at home, and their world is they get remote on different video types of chats. So it might be that it even impacts the next generation to a different awareness of, hey, I can learn it. My son just came back yesterday. He had his first really face-to-face again. And he said he was completely disappointed because it was reading slides. And why should he go somewhere to have somebody reading slides for him? Because he can do it at home.
Yeah,
that's experience it now. There's no added value. So we have to create added value if we really want to have the face-to-face experience superior to the virtual.
Yeah, I agree. Khan Academy was one of the first people to I think, unlock this a little bit, where if you let someone read or watch a video or consume content at their own pace first, right? Let them do this, read the slides themselves, watch a video. But then if you could do face-to-face with the hands-on component, so if you're doing work, if you're doing your homework or you're doing exercises or a lab or something like that, having someone with you in real time, I think that's actually valuable. I think that's maybe your son.
Yeah. But you still can have somebody in a virtual environment. If you have the instructor in face-to-face or in a virtual environment, the key element, and that's also the idea of the flipped classroom, where you really have the initial training you can do yourself at any time. But when it comes really to questions, very difficult topics, applying what you have learned to your personal situation and personal environment, that's is a time where it's really important to have someone who can help you.
Do you know like what kind of a learner you are? Like how the method in which you like to learn?
I changed over time because traditionally I started off also in a very classical manner, and I was an instructor myself. So sometimes it's hard to lose that kind of relationship with the students because obviously if you're in a face-to-face situation or now with a mask, everyone starts to realize what the nonverbal part is. What happens if the half of your face is covered and you lose out half of the communication part? So there's definitely a value of the face-to-face. But my learning also changed because I saw all the advantages of the self-paced. Because, for example, I'm cycling a lot and fixing my bike. I'm certainly not a great person in any mechanics. I'm watching YouTube videos how to do something. I won't take a 5-day training class how to change the gears or any of my brakes or so. That's something I can quickly get from the internet. I have it next to the screen next to my bike. It's almost like augmented reality where you have the reality of the bike and then the video next to it.
Yeah, I'm the same. I know that uh, I love to read. I love to watch at my own pace. I like to consume content in that way, but I do still like having an expert for some hands-on component.
Yeah.
I know that I will remember and I will be able to do it again if I do it myself. But I have I've actually had to overcome a little bit of fear because I like to do things the right way. I like to do things correct. There's other people that love to tinker. They'll just go out and they don't care if they fail. They don't care if they, I have this, I want to do it right. I have a fear of failure. So I want to have an expert that actually I can ask. I say, am I doing this the right way? So let's go back to the subscriptions just a little bit, because I think this is only going to accelerate and grow. And I think, as you said, people, certainly students now, they're doing more virtual, or that's going to be the way of life as we continue down the road. Let's talk about, so how do you guys, or do you use the data that you guys are seeing in terms of engagement, in terms of what people are taking with your subscriptions? Do you guys use that a lot?
Yeah. And it has to have a second part, which is your consumption strategy, because releasing a subscription and not really identifying how do you help customers using your subscription, because the third element of it is renewal, because any subscription is only as valuable as you are able to keep the customer relationship over years. So your first priority is really sell a subscription which hopefully lasts for more than one period of time. So in order to get there, the customer needs to have a value. If they don't have a value, they won't renew the subscription. So the consumption part is extremely important. And when we released it, we had a consumption strategy in place. However, we saw already in the beginning, it was really hard still to work with the customers, encourage customers using it, and get enough consumption. So in the first 6 months when we released the subscription, consumption was below what we would see as a value, which is typically what they paid for also.
And how did you measure consumption? Just how many pieces of content, or how many learning paths, or is that how you measured it?
Typically, we talked a bit about the pricing mechanism. So if you have a value-based pricing, you see the value of a subscription might be, for example, 10 days of training content. Then the user should have 10 days of training over the 1 year to see a value. It might be a bit more, might be a bit less. And of course, it's not only a quantitative number. It might be 2 days of training gave you so much benefit in saving time that you don't need more. But it's the most or the easiest way of accessing consumption data.
And how do you give them more value? Creating new content?
Yeah. And that's if you call it the Netflix dilemma, or however you want. If, for example, Netflix would decide one day not to create any new contents, you could see the number of the subscribers in minutes going down. Same thing here. The products are changing. We have to update our training contents to reflect the product changes. So that's almost a natural way of adding additional content for the latest releases. But then also in the depth of the curriculum. So in our case, we have a fundamentals curriculum, an advanced curriculum, and an expert curriculum. And you can add additional contents. Or for example, in the moment, we have a lot of customers migrating from one product area to another product area. And then we provide with migration contents, particularly. So, but you're definitely under the pressure to release new contents.
Yeah, but as you said, I mean, BMC, I'm sure you guys are an Agile engineering process. So you guys have many releases and features and functions coming. So just that is going to force you to create.
It does. Yeah, it's a race. Continuously a race, because we have many products, and then for each of the products, you have different versions. We have also on-prem versions and SaaS versions, and sometimes they are structurally the same, sometimes very different. And so almost naturally, you create on every quarter, we're releasing probably 40 training classes or different variations of courses and certifications.
Wow. Have you seen the content style change over the last 5 or 10 years?
Definitely. I think what on one side, and it was quite interesting. I spoke to another company providing contents just yesterday, and they still have a 10-day class. And I was really surprised to hear a 10-day class because what I see is really shortening, modularizing, building it in kind of blocks, making it easy to consume. So the question is also, can it be on mobile devices? We are currently piloting to include our training inside of the product with tools like WhatFix or WalkMe or Pendo. So it's really changing where you take the training and how you take it and how long you want to spend. It's not necessarily that all the content is gone. It's just the content is distributed and you take it when it's more required. So that it's not like I take 10 days of training and then hopefully I will remember everything. And then in a year from that, potentially I use one of these functionalities of the 10 days.
Mm-hmm. I've also seen, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but I think to go back to your YouTube analogy and learning about the mechanics of the bike, I think that YouTube and social media content has changed the expectations of people. I think I talk about this a lot, but I feel like authentic content from a subject matter expert is almost like a little bit more raw, is actually to some extent more accepted now than it used to be, where, we used to produce content with an instructional design and, production value. And I just feel like a lot of that's not as important because people are conditioned more to just get the authentic subject matter. Do you agree with that?
Partly. I believed it initially. To give you an example, what we released about 2 years ago is what we call an assisted self-paced. Assisted self-paced takes the content we have in a training class, and the instructor records each of the modules with a detailed, as he would do it in a training class. Our first release of the assisted self-paced was just recording a live session. Mm-hmm. So really authentic. To come to your point, my initial thought was, hey, if it's good enough in a training class, it should be also good enough in a recording. Because it's exactly the same experience, no difference. Feedback was terrible. So we are now in generation 4 of our assisted self-paced. So really the next step was we are not taking any live sessions anymore. We have a dedicated studio environment. Like in your case, I think you have in front of you a mic. So high quality microphones. You're perfectly prepared. So the mic was critical. The settings, the video environment made a big difference. And I look at the net promoter score of our training classes, at the student evaluations itself. And there's a clear improvement just from generation 1 to generation 2. In generation 3, for example, we added scripts and subtitles so that, especially for non-native speakers, it's easier. And our generation 4 starts now to look at can we do more kind of instructor, not only the PowerPoint presentation, but also the instructor demonstrating and the person coming in, which is not always easy in a private studio environment. But so it was a real experience that my initial thought of taking the classroom experience into a recording in a very raw format was definitely not the best choice.
But it's funny. I was actually going to ask you, give me an example of something that has not worked. And thank you very much. You answered it for me. But that's actually, I think that's really valuable stuff that you just shared. So just recording a classroom, not great, but chunking it out with, but a couple things are important. The microphone, the sound quality, creating, that matters. And I think that that's important for people to hear. We can't, it's not great to just shoot something on your iPhone and then upload it and have a little thought to it, put a little bit of production, some lighting and a mic. And I mean, that's not hard stuff either, though. I mean,
it is not. No. And it also depends how big is your audience, how technical is your audience. We're scaling it now for customers. If you have, for example, a transfer of information session, which is internal, which you have to release very quickly, you might not take the same attention in terms of the recording. So, for example, currently we built the program first for our own consulting team, and then we are taking the same program to the external side. And that internal first version is subject matter experts, talks for 45 minutes, has type of slide presentation, which is not perfect, but he comes clearly across, everyone understands, because our technical consultants understand the other technical consultants. If you take the same content, move it up now to the customer side, we want to make sure it appears professional. It makes a couple of things more explicit. We would normally not have to explain so detailed internally. And also, you might want even to remove some of internal discussions which are not out of interest for a customer. So there's really an editing, and either you do in voiceover, but you really can look at the life cycle of content. Content may start very immature and informal and end up into a very formal end user type of content later on.
In our, it's funny. It's funny. I get asked this constantly about, how do we create it? What do we need? How do we do it? I actually had one of my content producers. So we have our own academy, Raven 360 Academy, and we send very similarly. We just try to drive people from our public website right into our own academy. And we kind of we don't have the 3 levels that you guys have, but we have 2. We have kind of a basic, learn about the product, learn about what we do. And one of the learning paths that I had our content producer, I just said, hey, create a learning path on how to create content. What do you do? And that's been super popular. People have been like, oh, great. I can go figure, just get some ideas. So I feel like that's something that people have held a little bit tight to the vest, but at the same time, it's like, look, we're trying to help and just say, how do you do it? So I appreciate you sharing kind of your thoughts around it, because we get asked all the time about how do you create it? How is it evolving? So that's been really helpful. So back to we got off on the content tangent there, but let's get back to the data. I am always so curious about data. So you talked about the use of your data for renewals, number one. So how do you get to people to renew? Do you look at visitors that sign up for your Explorer subscription? Do you look at that, number one? And then part 2 of that question is, do you find people will go out and sign up for Explorer that are not even BMC customers yet? Does that happen?
It may happen. In our case, for example, to sign up for the Explorer, you need to register at least for our system. So you have officially an account, but you can get an account as a prospect, as an example. And that's not a bad idea, because if you take training, it has, as part of the overall enablement, different phases. You have a phase in the pre-sales phase where the enablement really helps to understand the full functionality and gives you kind of details you might not have in a sales conversation or during a pilot phase. So it's adding value for the customer as well as for us as a vendor. And then still in the next phase, as soon as the customer has the product and is deploying the product, the training helps the project team in setting up the deployment. It helps the user acceptance team to understand what they are testing. And then later on, while you have a go live phase, you need to train the end users. So we, for example, just created a package which supports the customer life cycle from the pre-deployment time to the post-deployment time for the complete life cycle, because sometimes it's kind of training is isolated, seen around the go live. But however, you need to have prior go live knowledge, and you need to have skills, of course, and improving your skills over the time of usage.
Yeah, and I asked that because more and more, and this is kind of recent, we've seen within Academy, or just with access to that type of a subscription that's free, access to some level of detail about the product set, is helping convert people into customers, helping convert prospects into buyers. We're actually doing that with a lot of data now, and I think it's just the way that people are buying now. People want to go and get more information on their own before they talk to a salesperson or before they talk to pre-sales. Even they just want to say, like, well, if you can give me some exposure to the product, some deeper learning, some deeper knowledge, not all of it, but give me some exposure to the product. I feel like that really helps people get further down the buying cycle. I feel like as trainers and educators, we have a level of thought we put into content about getting someone to some level of knowledge. So I just think like those free subscriptions are a great idea because it helps even prospective buyers. Now with you guys, I get they have to have some account maybe set up, but what I've seen recently is people taking those and just giving it to prospects and saying, go learn about our products a little bit more right off the public website. And it's helpful. And so with your content, do you guys interface? Do you talk to sales with that data? Do you ever collaborate?
Yeah, you have different ways. I think what you're mentioning is what I would call the free to fee-based continuum. Right? And that continuum is kind of in a change because at least in the education world in the past, almost nothing was free and almost everything was fee-based. With the kind of consumer experience, everyone has now that if you sign up for any service, you have a trial period. Right? And that, I see the younger generation has in the meantime an expertise to change email address and everything to have only trial periods.
Yes.
And that raises a bit of the challenge. If you have a lot of content changing on a very frequent basis, a trial period is not a risk. Because if you have a trial period to video content, the video contents are changing every half a month or so, then if the month is over, you're still losing a lot, where you have access to all games, and you're like in Germany, soccer games, and you want to see them. A month is only a piece. In our case, for example, you could take in a month a lot of training already. A trial period for a month of full access to every training we have would mean almost you get the full value of the fee-based. So you have really to look at specifically the contents you have and the frequency of updates, what you can offer as a free offer in comparison to your fee-based offer. But then also you have to accept the market dynamics. And as a company, you have to take a decision. You include some of these services already into the product. And then you have kind of an internal refunding mechanism that with the product, you're refunding the content updates and the content delivery. Or if you still keep a significant part on the fee-based side. And that continuum is in a constant discussion in every company, because if you fund it internally, you need to find a way of, can you add it to the cost of your products, or how do you recover it? And that requires you talk with the different teams. You have your consulting teams, your support teams, your product teams, your sales organization. And everyone has, of course, based on their objectives, a different perspective. So definitely a lot of reason for having long calls every day.
Yes, long calls every day. But I think, in learning and in training, I think that we can do a better job many times in selling the value a little bit and selling that, look, an educated... there's a very famous phrase that it's an older phrase in the US that they used to say a lot, which was, what is it? An educated consumer is our best customer.
Yeah. And we could even prove it with data. What we did is, for example, we looked at the renewal rates and the total amount of license sales for customers trained versus non-trained. And there's a multitude difference. In terms of customers buying training, we even correlated with the amount of training in terms of did they spend only 10K versus 20 or 40K. And that definitely helped tremendously to convince also our sales teams, making sure that we have the education early on in the discussion so a customer has an opportunity to budget for training. Because the worst thing what could happen is we position our product, the customer has a product, and then a couple of months while they're using it, they're really struggling and they don't get to the value, and the whole value proposition of our product is threatened. So the key is really, as soon as we're positioning products, and positioning also the enablement helps to secure the long-term success for both sides, the customer and us as a vendor.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, is that, make sure your sales teams are comped on including it in the but what you just said, we see it too. If you get someone to consume training content, pay for training content, and they take it, they become a better customer. They buy more. They're a happier customer because they use the product more effectively.
Yeah, and then it becomes more sticky, because the idea is really, the more functionalities they use, the more likely they continue using it, because they have more options of also using it. If you only use the base functionality, you can easily switch to any other vendor in that space.
That's the key. I mean, what you just said, I think, is what we try to promote over and over and get others to promote, is that we know with the data that renewals are more likely, stickiness is more likely, brand loyalty, all the things you want from your customers. It all happens if they're well educated, if they're well trained, and they're having a great experience. Good things happen.
That's the reason why we're in education. It's one of the great places you can be. Huh?
It is, and then you see the results, and the results are amazing. So that's the fun part. Oh, by the way, one last question, right? What Oktoberfest? What's happening? Is it going to happen or what?
It's kind of the biggest tradition in Munich, over 200 years. This year is completely canceled. The beer gardens.
I didn't know that. They canceled already.
They canceled it completely because it's 6 million people. And imagine and try to have a 1.5 meters or something like 4 or 5 feet distance while you're dancing on the table at the Oktoberfest. So there was no alternative. You have to.
Hey, Dirk, thank you again. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you so much for all of your knowledge and for sharing all of this information with us.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. It was a pleasure again, and probably we could talk for ages.
Well, for this one, we talked about subscriptions, we talked about certifications, we talked about the value of getting people to consume learning. I feel like we're just getting started still, so I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions and feedback. And you're going to be our first triple crown on the Training-Led Growth podcast.
Let's see. Yeah, and if anyone has questions, I'm more than welcome to answer it.
Yeah. How do people get in touch with you? LinkedIn, is that the best way if someone wants?
LinkedIn is great. Send me an email to Dirk_Braune@bmc.com.
Dirk_Braune@bmc.com. Thank you very much for sharing that. And you'll probably get some emails. And then they can find you, Dirk Braune, on LinkedIn, BMC.
Right. Yeah.
Easy way to connect. So that's so helpful. And thank you again, Dirk, so much for your time. And we'll talk again. I'd love to.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Joe. Cheers. And I hope to see you in Munich. I hope to see you
at the Oktoberfest
at a beer garden.
Beer garden. That's fine. That's open.
All right. Thanks so much, Dirk.